A lesson from a tree on this week's episode of Liberty at Home. Hello everyone, Adam RIVEIRO here for the latest edition of Liberty at Home. As you may know, I'm the pastor of Liberty Baptist Church, which meets on Route 138 right here in town. And today, as always, we're broadcasting from Easton, Massachusetts, which is part of the South Shore of Boston. Or is it? It depends on who you ask. Let me know in the comments. Today, we'll be looking at the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians. So pause the video if you're watching online, grab your Bible, and join me as we read 3 verses from chapter 11. And beginning in verse 8, it says, "For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in my infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong." When we moved into our apartment in Easton a few years ago, the complex was still being built, building by building. Living in the midst of a construction zone and watching the complex come together was interesting. Near the end of construction, a landscaping company came and planted scores of trees all over the complex. These saplings were scraggly looking. In fact, most of them looked as if a puff of wind could snap them in two. To protect these young trees from such a fate, their trunks were bolstered by straps that were attached to stakes deep in the soil. And they stayed tied down this way for over 2 years. During this time, the trees were able to put down roots deep into the soil. Once the trees had grown sufficiently both above and below ground, the stakes were removed. Now, later, as our apartment complex expanded again, a temporary safety fence was placed around the new construction zone. However, this flimsy fence fell over several times in the first week or two after it was erected when a string of strong storms blew through town. After that happened, I noticed something interesting about this ramshackle fence, though. To keep it from continually falling over, someone had placed straps on it and anchored it to a nearby tree. Now, a few years ago, the tree was the one that needed strength. Now it was providing strength to something else that was weak. Now, getting back to our text in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes an infirmity that he calls his thorn in the flesh. Although we don't know what exactly the specific condition was, it was something that caused him great physical weakness. In fact, he says that he asked God on 3 separate occasions to take away this weakening agent from his life. Yet, God did not answer Paul's request in the way the apostle was hoping. He remained weak in his body. But over time, Paul came to understanding that this weakness was actually beneficial for his life. In fact, God told Paul, "My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness," which brought Paul to the conclusion that, "Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am become strong." Because Paul was weakened through his physical difficulties, he was then able to strengthen thousands upon thousands of others through his personal weaknesses. Like a weak tree that later was able to lend strength to another object, Paul was able to aid untold numbers on his missionary journeys, all because he had experienced weakness in his own life. Of course, he couldn't do this on his own power. It was the power of Christ that was the straps that stabilized him and allowed him to grow in his time of weakness. Friend, if you're going through trials in your life, don't focus on your weaknesses. Allow the power of Christ to strengthen you so that you, in turn, can strengthen those around you. Take heart in the words of Peter, who said in his first epistle, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you, but rejoice, insomuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding joy. In your weakness, God will give you strength, and in turn, you'll be able to strengthen someone else who needs your help." Well, it's time to call it a day for this week's episode of Liberty at Home. But just before we go off air, I want to remind you to come see us sometime soon at 800 Washington Street right here in Easton. We meet every Sunday morning at 11 a.m., Sunday night at 5 p.m., and Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Check us out and follow all of our digital platforms at mylibertybaptist.org. Well, I'm Pastor Adam Rivero, signing off from ECAT today, reminding you, as always, that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. See you next week, right here on Liberty at Home.